Over the last decade, in working with families at significant levels of wealth, $10 million, $20 million, $30 million or more in liquid investable assets, I've asked many of them the same question. If you had 1 year to live, you'd be completely healthy, and money was no option, what would you do that you haven't already done? And not once has anybody said a material purchase, another property, or a portfolio adjustment. It's almost always an experience, a place, time with the people they love, something they've been putting off for way too long. So today, I'm going to break down for you how ultra-high net worth families spend between $250,000 a year to $1 million a year on annual experiences, tier by tier, what each level unlocks, and how this might be one of the most under-allocated areas of capital at this level of wealth. So let me set the stage, because I think this is important context. You spent decades building, and during those decades, vacations were probably an afterthought. Even when you took them, you probably spent the first few days decompressing and the last few days preparing to go back to work. Now, the resources are there, yet there's a hesitation that can be kind of hard to explain. Maybe it shows up as procrastination. Oh, we'll book something big next year. Or maybe it shows up as defaulting to the same old stuff. The same hotel, the same destination, because it's easier than figuring out something new. Or maybe it's more subtle. You take the trip, but you catch yourself in the back of your mind doing the math. You enjoy the dinner, you enjoy the trip, but there's a faint voice asking if it's too much. You have the means at this point to create virtually any experience you want, yet you're operating with the same guardrails of life where at some point every dollar had a job. And here's what I've seen when this pattern goes unaddressed. The window narrows. Not financially, the money's fine, but physically and psychologically. Your parents get older, your kids' schedules get more busy, and your priorities change too. And that trip you kept saying next year to becomes the trip you wish you had done. But the families who allocate capital towards experiences with real intention, they do something different. They spend without a need to justify it. They treat it as a category that requires the same planning, structure, and execution as every other category in their financial life. So let me show you exactly what this looks like at 4 different stages, starting off at $75,000 a year and scaling up to $750,000 a year, and what each stage gets you. At $75,000 a year in experiential spending, you're living well. These trips tend to be premium, high-class experiences. But at this level, you're still the architect. You're still researching, planning, booking, and executing. And that operational role shapes the experience more than people realize. Let me give you 2 examples of what $75,000 in experiential spending can look like. First, the milestone trip. Say 2 weeks in Japan with your spouse, something you've been talking about for 5 years, but you've actually decided to pull the trigger on. Business class trips from the East Coast, roughly $10,000 to $14,000 round trip for 2 tickets. 10 nights across Tokyo, Kyoto, and Hakone. Boutique luxury hotels. Think Aman, Kyoto, or a premier ryokan in Hakone. Averaging somewhere between $1,200 to $1,800 a night, so about $15,000 to $20,000 in total. Private cultural experiences. A tea ceremony, a sushi masterclass with an elite world-class chef. Private temple tours in Kyoto, a day trip along the Nakasendo Trail. Say $8,000 to $12,000. Dining in Japan. And from what I've been told, dining is quite the experience in itself. Omakase dinners, izukaya crawls, and Kobe beef in Kobe. Bullet train passes, private transfers, and miscellaneous spending to round it out. All in, somewhere between $50,000 to $70,000 for 2 people for 2 weeks. And here's what that creates. You come back and you're both different. You shared multiple meals without looking at your phone. You were able to take walks through bamboo forests without a word. The second example of this tier is what I'd call the quarterly escape rhythm. Rather than one large annual trip, some families decide to spread it out over the course of 4 extended weekends throughout the year. A 4-night wine trip through Portugal's Douro Valley, say $8,000 to $12,000, or an extended weekend at Banff for the fall foliage. 3 or 4 of these per year alongside one larger trip, and travel stops becoming a big event and rather becomes a part of life. And the families who do this without guilt or second guessing have already made the intentional choice as to what they're going to allocate towards these ventures annually. Now, at $75,000 in annual experiential spending, you're creating extraordinary personal memories. But at this next level, something shifts that many people don't anticipate. It's not necessarily about the trips themselves, but about who you become on them. The jump from $75,000 to $150,000 in annual experiential spending isn't necessarily about fancier trips or longer durations. The fundamental shift in my eyes is that you stop being the planner and you're able to now be fully present. The logistics disappear, and what's left is the experience itself, uninterrupted. And here's what I mean. At $75,000, you're probably still spending hours of your time planning things out. At $150,000, you could transition that responsibility entirely, whether to a travel agent or your executive assistant. The point is, you describe the vision and someone else engineers it. You say, we want 10 days somewhere remote, we want incredible dining experiences, and we want to feel like we're the only two people on Earth. And 2 weeks later, you have 3 fully curated options with every detail handled. And what you get back is more than just your time. It's your headspace. So you arrive at the trip completely relaxed because you did not spend the last 6 weeks planning it out. Let me show you what this looks like. You, your spouse, your 2 adult children, their partners, and 4 grandkids. 10 total people. You tell your travel designer, somewhere dramatic, outdoor focused, the kids need to be amazed. What comes back? 12 days on New Zealand's South Island. A private luxury lodge near Queenstown as home base. Call it $2,400 to $4,000 a night, or between $35,000 to $50,000 for the whole stay. A chartered helicopter to Milford Sound for a private cruise. Call it another $15,000 to $20,000. Private guided glacier hikes for the adults while the kids are at the adventure park. Another $5,000 to $8,000. A sheep station experience where the grandkids are helping to shear sheep, learning about the culture, and taking it all in. Another $3,000 to $5,000. Flights, transfers, ground transportation, and meals, in addition to all the other miscellaneous spending, brings your total to somewhere between $120,000 to $150,000. And here's what that creates. Your grandkids are talking about the helicopter ride 6 months later. Or you overhear your daughter telling one of her friends that it was the trip of her life. Your son-in-law, who's been skeptical about being away from work for 12 days, says it's the most present he's ever been. And you and your spouse look at each other at dinner on the last night, and it hits you both. At the same tier, not every experience involves a large group. In fact, I've seen some of the most meaningful also be the most personal. A 10-day trek through Patagonia, privately guided, luxury camps, about $40,000 to $55,000. Something earned, not just enjoyed. Now at $150,000, you're fully present on these trips because logistics are someone else's job. But at the next tier, something happens that goes far beyond the trip itself. It's the approach that I mentioned in the beginning that I've seen reshape families' relationships with wealth. At $350,000 in annual experiential spending, the nature of the experience changes. It's no longer primarily about the destination or the luxury. It's about what the experience does to the people who share it. At this level, families start building what I would call experiential rituals. These are recurring commitments that shape who they are as a family. Not a trip they took once, a tradition that defines them. Maybe it's 2 weeks to the Swiss Alps, not just to ski, but for the entire family to gather together. The cousins learn to ski together, the adults have long dinners while the children are fast asleep, and the grandparents watch it all from the distance in a lodge. Roughly $80,000 to $120,000 annually for a premium chalet, ski instruction, activities, and meals for 12 to 15 people. Maybe it's 10 days every summer, cruising the fjords of Norway. Hiking, fishing, exploring remote villages. A completely different pace, and roughly $60,000 to $90,000 for a private charter and full logistics taken care of. Layer on a couple's getaway to Iceland, a challenge trip to the Canadian Rockies, and a few extra weekend travels here and there, and you're at about $350,000 annually. And what this creates is beyond memory. The family develops a shared vocabulary. Switzerland isn't a destination. It's a feeling, a tradition, a set of inside jokes only you and those that you love understand. The grandkids grow up expecting this tradition, and that expectation is the connective tissue that holds the family together as everyone's lives become more complex. Now here's what I teased at the beginning, and where it can get very powerful. Designing the trips that intentionally weave in perspective and purpose here and there. Something immersive and real. Here's what this might look like. A family spends 2 weeks in Peru. The first week, absolutely incredible. Machu Picchu at sunrise via private rail. The Sacred Valley with a private historian. World-class dining in Lima and a boutique hacienda in the countryside. The second week looks very different. The family visits a rural community in the highlands. And here, a clean water initiative, partially funded by their giving, has been running for about 2 years. They actually get to meet the families who use it, and they see the infrastructure they've helped fund. The additional cost for that second week, beyond the first week of travel, roughly $10,000 to $20,000. But here's why I believe this could be the most important part of this video. That second week does something that no trust document, no family meeting, no portfolio review, and no financial literacy course can ever do. It makes the abstraction of wealth real. Your grandkids don't understand a net worth statement, but they can understand the fact that you helped build something that changed lives. And that understanding, that felt, lived experience, can help bolster the next generation as they become future stewards of wealth. And it's at this level precisely where lifestyle and planning can become fully integrated. Now, at $350,000 in annual spend, you're building traditions that can anchor your family's identity and prepare the next generation. But at this next level, the difference between experience and legacy essentially dissolves. At $750,000 in annual experiential spending, you're no longer planning trips. You're curating a life where extraordinary experiences are the default rhythm of the year, where every season has its signature. The annual rhythm might look something like this. January and February, 3 weeks in Maldives. A private villa compound on its own island, fully staffed with your entire family. April, a 10-day trip to Bhutan. You and your spouse, culturally immersed. June and July, a private expedition yacht through the Galapagos Islands. 10 days, 12 family members, onboard naturalists and marine biologists. September, a month in the south of France. A sprawling estate and province that becomes the family's late summer meeting point. November, 2 weeks in Oman. Part desert expedition, part coastal exploration. Add in milestone celebrations and spontaneous getaways, and you'll find yourself somewhere between $500,000 to $800,000 in annual spend. And here's what shifts at this level. The calendar itself becomes an expression of values. Where you go, who you go with, what you do when you get there. They all tell the story about what's important to you and your family. Now let me bring this all together, because there's an insight that I think families of significant wealth tend to overlook. They'll spend 100 hours trying to optimize an investment strategy that might yield an extra 0.5%. But they'll spend almost no time trying to design with intention the experiential side of their life. The side that when I ask about years later, ends up being at the top of their list. The portfolio adjustment they made back in 2019, they might remember the rationale as to why. But the memory of the look on their grandson's face when he saw his first glacier, unparalleled. That's the asymmetry. The financial strategies are important. They enable everything. But the experiences themselves are what make everything worth enabling in the first place. And remember, none of this works as an afterthought. The families who invest in experiences at this level and feel extraordinary about it have been deliberate. And they've given it the same respect and structure that they give every other important aspect of their lives. Here's what I'll leave you with. In almost every conversation that I've had with somebody that has built significant wealth over time, there comes a crossroads where the money stops mattering and the experiences matter the most. And here's the thing. When I asked that question, if you had 1 year to live, you'd be completely healthy and money was not an object, what would you do that you have not already done? The answer has nothing to do with portfolio returns or asset allocation. The answer has to do with experiences, connections, and being present. And if you're in the process of trying to understand what your financial life looks like, check out our next video here.